Picture this. July 1518, the free city of Strasbourg. Noon heat makes the cobblestones shimmer, bread steams on market stalls, and flies stitch lazy circles in the air. In a narrow lane, a woman in a plain dress takes a jaunty step, then another. Someone laughs until she keeps going. Her name is Frau Trophaea. She dances through the hour, then the next, and the next. No lute, no drum, no festival day. Just the slap of shoes on stone and a rhythm only she can hear. By late afternoon, a ring of neighbors has formed. Her husband pleads, gripping her wrists. She twists free and turns again. A boy claps, thinking it is a trick. A priest makes the sign of the cross. A barber surgeon checks her pulse, then shrugs. There is no fever, no wine on her breath. Only her feet bleeding through their leather and her eyes fixed on nothing. Evening falls, the bells toll vespers. Frau Trophaea staggers, sways, and dances on. The crowd brings water, bread, a stool she refuses to use. Her limbs jerk in fits, then settle into a frantic cadence. Some whisper of Saint Vitus, punisher of sinful dancers. Others mutter about bad air rising from the river, or a curse laid by a jealous neighbor. One old woman swears she sees sparks leap from the dancers' heels each time they strike the stone. Toward midnight, the city watch arrives to clear the lane. They can move the crowd, but not the woman. She seems lashed to an invisible tune, body answering a command that does not come from her. The watchmen trade glances, ask what law covers this, and leave her husband to carry her home. He cannot. She will not stop. When dawn bleeds over the rooftops, Frau Trophaea is still moving. Her feet are raw, dress soaked, lips cracked. The baker shakes his head and opens his shutters. Children point. A clerk pauses on his way to the chancery and writes a single baffled note in his book. A woman danced through the night. Within days they will say, she will not be alone. By the third day, the city begins to feel enchanted, and not in a good way. Frau Trophaea is still moving, and now a handful of strangers sway beside her as if pulled by the same invisible tide. A tanner who came to stare begins to stamp his feet. A girl from the fish market twirls until her braid uncoils. By sunset, a dozen bodies are jerking in staggered time, eyes glassy, mouths cracked. Mothers drag children indoors and bolt the door. Windows fill with faces anyway. The council meets in haste. Physicians are summoned to the Guildhall. Men in fur collars who speak of overheated blood and a corruption of the humors. Do not frighten them with exorcists, they advise. Let the heat run its course. Let the body purge itself through motion. The prescription is simple and terrible. Give them space to dance. Carpenters are ordered to raise a platform near the grain market. Musicians are hired to shape the chaos into rhythm. Drums thud, shawms keen, and the afflicted flood the planks as if a dam has burst. Feet slap wood. Sweats darken tunics. Some collapse and are carried to the shade, only to lurch upright and fling themselves back into the crush as if a hook has caught behind the ribs. The city tries to continue as normal. Bakers haul flour past the crowd. Clerks push through with their ledgers hugged to the chest. A wedding procession detours and the bride stares, white knuckles around her bouquet. In the afternoon heat, a man in his 40s drops, chest fluttering like a trapped bird, and does not rise. People murmur the word, heart. No one knows for certain. The drums do not stop. On the 5th day, the bells ring for a special mass. Priests process through the streets with relics held high. Saint Vitus is invoked again and again, the martyr who punishes dancers, the patron who can lift a foot that will not stop. The council reverses course. Platforms are dismantled. Public music is banned. Fines are announced for any fiddler who stirs a crowd. It is too late. The rhythm has moved inside the city like fever through a body. Behind shuttered windows, people begin to sway. A miller's wife wakes from a dream with her calves already marching. A scribe's apprentice skips his quill across the page and follows his legs into the lane. By week's end, the count is a rumor that swells with every telling. Dozens, some say. Hundreds, say others. The only number everyone agrees on is tomorrow, because tomorrow there will be more. Step back from the square and the sweat and look at the year itself. Strasbourg in 1518 is a tinderbox. 2 summers of poor harvests have thinned the bread, flour prices creep upward week by week, and the heat sits on the roofs like a weight. The hospital is full, plague talk never quite dies, and the guilds quarrel over dues while the council posts new edicts against begging. Priests preach repentance in voices hoarse from funerals. Every sermon promises both mercy and punishment. Everyone is tired. Fear looks for a shape. The city loves prodigies and warnings. Pamphlets list comets and eclipses and calves born with 2 heads. Relics parade through the streets to still the air and settle the conscience. St. Vitus is a favorite in these parts, the martyr who binds disobedient limbs, and the patron who can calm a body seized by a wild movement. Children are told not to mock the holy, or their feet will learn to dance without them. Add heat, hunger, and sermons to a city already stretched thin, then drop a single woman who cannot stop moving into the middle of it. The first onlookers feel pity, then pity becomes fear, fear becomes expectation. A neighbor dreams that her calves will not obey and wakes already swaying. A guildsman who has not slept for 3 nights feels a tremor in his thigh and wonders if a saint has noticed his sins. The mind, primed by stories and shame, does the rest. Physicians reach for the words they have. They talk of hot blood and corrupted humors. Some mutter about foul airs from the river. Bakers curse the rye and cross themselves in the same breath. A few suspect the grain itself, a blight that can make hands twitch and skin burn. But that would mean the sickness sits on every table in the city, and no one wants to believe that. Better a saint with rules than a hunger with none. Meanwhile, the measures move in circles. First, give them space to dance, then ban the music, then shoo them like pilgrims and send them to the shrine, then call the shrine dangerous because the very name of the saint keeps the thought alive. The council wants a clean lever to pull. There is not one. The rhythm spreads because the city hears it everywhere. By the time the weather turns, Strasbourg has learned how quickly a story can become a symptom. The merchants reopen their shutters, but they keep an eye on their own legs. The bells ring for market day as usual. No one says plague. No one says miracle. Everyone says, let it pass, and hopes the fear learned a lesson along with the feet. The road to the shrine winds through fields baked to straw. Carts creak under the weight of bodies that cannot keep still. Shoemakers have stitched soft red slippers with little crosses, and the afflicted wear them like talismans. At a wayside chapel, a priest lifts a relic and touches each pair of soles, murmuring prayers, while attendants press cool cloths to foreheads. For some, the ritual works like a key turned in a stubborn lock. Legs slacken, eyes close, and sleep finally takes them. For others, the rhythm only quiets, then returns with a vicious snap as if a drum had started again inside the chest. The shrine itself is a small forest of candles. Ex-votos crowd the walls, wax legs and wooden feet carved in hope. The guardians of the place have seen seizures and trances before, yet nothing like this tide of restless bodies. They lead the dancers in circles to controlled hymns, hoping to drain the frenzy by guiding it. A girl collapses beside the altar and wakes with a soft cry, astonished to find her calves obedient. A weaver sways through the entire mass without hearing a word of it, then weeps into his sleeves when the bell rings for dismissal and his feet are still moving. Back in Strasbourg, the council sets up an infirmary near the river. Barbers bleed a few patients, then stop when the weakness doubles. Physicians prescribe cool rooms, thin broths, and quiet. But the city is loud by nature, and any sudden chant in the street can set a recovered man tapping his heels. Guilds organize aid. Brewers send barrels of watered ale. Bakers send loaves. A pair of midwives sit with the worst cases through the night and keep their hands wrapped in linen to prevent self-injury. To keep fear from spreading, heralds order taverns to close at sundown and musicians to travel without instruments. Rumor does not respect curfew. A merchant carries the tale east to a river town, and by weekend, a single woman there begins to sway at her washboard. A pilgrim brings it west to a monastery where a novice dreams his legs are marching of their own will, and wakes with the dream now living in his calves. People start to notice how easily a body can learn a movement merely by watching it. Old men say it is like a yawn. Priests say it is a test. Night by night the tide shifts. Some return from the shrine, steady on their feet. Others vanish from notice as families keep them indoors with prayers and warm compresses. A few names are recorded by the priests who bury them, men and women whose hearts failed after days without rest. The city writes new rules, then tears them down, then writes them again. More than any law, time and weather do the heavy work. The fever seems to loosen its grip, yet no one dares to claim victory. The tune has gone quiet, but everyone wonders where it went. When the worst of the frenzy ebbs, the city does what cities do. It counts. Parish clerks enter names into burial rolls with careful hands. Guilds tally missed dues and advance small loans to widows. The hospital lists new bedsides where joints must be bound and blisters lanced. A baker calculates how much flour he lost when his apprentice slipped off mid-knead and did not return for 3 days. The numbers never quite agree, but the feeling does. Strasbourg is tired to the bone. With quiet comes explanation. Physicians present a memorandum that speaks of overheated blood and corrupted humors, and recommends cool rooms, thin broths, and prayer said softly. Priests answer with sermons that braid mercy and warning. They remind the faithful that St. Vitus binds wandering limbs, and that vows must be kept. A few scholars gather in the scriptorium and try to build order from scraps. One argues for miasma rising from summer rot. Another suspects rye turned bad in the fields. A third writes the words, collective fear, and then crosses them out and replaces them with the safer phrase, spiritual affliction. Rumor prefers sharper shapes. Some accuse musicians who played in the first days of calling the devil with their pipes. Others blame a tanner's wife who supposedly cursed the market after a quarrel. Old men mutter about witches. The council refuses to open that door. It has seen what follows when a city goes looking for culprits it already fears. Instead, it issues edicts that feel practical, if not decisive. No public music without license. No processions except on holy days. No gatherings after sunset in the squares where the dancing began. Beyond the walls, stories lengthen. Travelers speak of other years when bodies moved in helpless chains along the Rhine, of villages where entire congregations swayed until they fell, of priests who led lines of dancers by the hand into shrines and out again as if walking a storm ashore. An elderly canon remembers the great raptus of 1374 that his master told him about, and says it felt like a river in a narrow bed. Once it rises, you can only climb and wait. By late summer, the markets are open. Grain from the uplands softens prices, and rain has hammered the scent of hot stone out of the lanes. Life resumes its ordinary frictions, yet a residue remains. A mother watches her daughter at the loom and measures the tap of her heel against the shuttle. A clerk sets his quill down when a hymn begins in the street and breathes until the urge to sway leaves his calves. Strasbourg has learned emotion it would rather forget, and the city's memory holds it like a knot that will not quite come loose. Explanations multiply in the calm that follows, each one carrying a piece of the truth, and none of them the whole. The physicians return to humors and heat. They speak of hearts pounded thin by summer, and blood churned into a froth that will not settle. Priests point to St. Vitus and the long habit of warning children that mockery will earn a lesson in restless feet. The guild elders prefer causes they can tax or fine. They blame music in the squares, wine in the lanes, dancers who forgot their vows. A few voices whisper about the grain. Out in the fields, rye heads sometimes blacken with hard little horns. Millers curse these stones in the flour and sift what they can. Some swear that bread from such meal brings fire under the skin and crawling lights at the edge of sight. The word poison hangs in the air, yet it does not land. To name the bread is to accuse the table itself, and no city wants that quarrel. Another theory moves more quietly. It begins in kitchens and at wells, where women trade news. They speak of sleeplessness, of empty cupboards, of sons conscripted, of sermons that pound and pound about sin until the words hum in the skull. A neighbor watches a dancer for an hour and goes home with the rhythm still pacing her calves. A clerk hears a drum roll across the square and feels his knee bounce against the bench for the rest of the day. The mind learns by seeing. Fear sets the tempo. Bodies follow. There are older names for it. Chorea sancti vitae, dancing sickness, a rapture that is not joy. In the Rhine towns, people remember lines of men and women long before this summer, moving as if tied to a rope that only saints could cut. Relief often came not from a purge or a potion, but from a ritual that made sense of the terror. Shoes blessed at a shrine, souls touched with a relic. A pilgrimage that turned panic into a path with a finish. Strasbourg folds all of these stories into one tapestry. Because cities cannot live with blank spaces. Ergot, heat, bad air, hunger, terror, saints, shame. Each offers a handle, and a handle feels like control. In truth, the causes braided together like cords. A season of hunger and heat tightened the knot. A warning turned legend gave it a shape. A crowd gave it momentum. A city gave it a stage. What remains is the lesson no one writes in the records. A tune can be born from weather and want. Once heard, it can move from ear to nerve to street. Once learned, it is hard to forget. The story does not stay where it happened. It travels on wagons and in mouths. A peddler carries it north with a sack of buttons. A canon repeats it to a cousin in Speyer. A merchant writes it into a ledger margin beside the tally for rye. In each retelling, the details shift a little the way light shifts on water. A single woman becomes 3. Dozens become hundreds. A death in the square becomes a dozen in the same hour. The shape is constant. A city where feet could not keep still. Clerks do their slow work. In the chapter house, a scribe copies a short notice into the annals. In the Guildhall, a steward notes fines for music without license. In parish books, a curate adds a line to a burial and underlines it twice. In these small strokes, the frenzy becomes history. Not a miracle and not a scandal. Simply a thing that happened in a dry and hungry summer. Preachers make use of it. In villages along the Rhine, the homily stretches a little longer. The faithful hear of pride laid low and of vows to saints that must be paid. A friar in Colmar warns his flock against mockery and idle songs. A humanist in Basel shakes his head and tells his students to trust cool rooms and reason. The tale fits any lesson the teller prefers. It is a mirror that offers back fear or order as needed. Artists and printers find it as well. A woodcut shows a ring of dancers in front of a church while a priest lifts a relic and a drummer beats time. The faces are not joyous. They are fixed and far away. Such pictures sell because buyers enjoy horror at a safe distance. The sheet goes from stall to stall and then into trunks where it will sleep for years until another hot summer wakes it. Inside Strasbourg, the memory settles into corners. Old men at the bathhouse speak softly about the weeks when the square shook. Women at the well nod when a hymn takes a certain pace and everyone pauses for a breath. A musician tunes his shawm and keeps one eye on the watchman even when the license is in his purse. A mother watches her daughter skip a rope and feels the prickle of an old fear under her skin. The city writes rules that outlast the season. No playing in the market without leave. Processions only on named days. Shrines to be visited with a priest and a family member. To outsiders, these sound like ordinary order. To those who remember, they are spells laid across a place that once learned a dangerous song. Years later, a traveler stops in Strasbourg and hears nothing unusual. The markets bustle. The bells ring for mass and for meat and for marriages. If he asks an innkeeper about dancing, he will get a shrug. If he asks an old woman who keeps to the shade, she may tell him that once, in a heat that felt like a lid on the world, the streets beat like a drum, and the city moved as one body. Then she will pour water, and the story will end the way many things end. With a pause, a nod, and the business of the day. Centuries later, the summer of 1518 still pulls scholars into its orbit. They sift parish rolls and city ledgers and try to hear the rhythm beneath the ink. 3 families of explanation rise and fall like voices in a choir. Each sounds convincing on its own. Together they argue with one another across time. The first speaks of grain. Rye grows well in wet years and badly in hot ones, and sometimes dark horns swell where kernels should be. Millstones grind them into flour all the same. Bread from such meal can bring crawling lights at the edge of sight, burning skin, cramps that seize a body like a puppeteer's hand. Ergot is the modern name. To those who favor this answer, the dance looks like poison, set to a drum. The second answer is older than any microscope. It says a massed fear can learn to move. Put a city under heat and hunger. Add sermons about sin and a legend about a saint who punishes mockery with restless feet. Add a crowd that watches day after day until the watching itself becomes a rehearsal. Minds catch and mirror one another. A gesture becomes a habit. A habit becomes a tide. No devil required. Only people and pressure, and a story that shows them how to break. The third answer keeps one foot in heaven. It notes how quickly relief followed ritual. Shoes blessed at a shrine. Souls touched with a relic. A pilgrimage walked and completed. To those who lived then, the binding of St. Vitus felt as real as any rope. The balm was not a purge or a draft. It was a promise spoken in a place that made promises stick. That is not science, say some. That is sense-making. Others reply that sense-making is the medicine most bodies need. Patterns help. The Rhine towns had seen this before. In 1374, whole lines of men and women moved together from village to village like a human flood. Priests led them by the hand to chapels where the noise could soften into chant, and the feet could learn a slower measure. Strasbourg in 1518 fits the shape. Hunger, heat, a saint with a story, a crowd. A climb toward a shrine, then a long letting down. If there is a single culprit, it hides behind a veil. Perhaps tainted loaves sickened a few, and spectacle did the rest. Perhaps fear alone, primed by sermons and legend, marched from eye to nerve to street. Perhaps the dance was many small causes braided tight until no hand could tease them apart. What matters for the city is not the label. It is the memory of how quickly a movement can become a movement in the other sense. One body, then 10, then a square, then a city. Modern readers want a final line that says, "Case closed." Strasbourg offers only a caution. Human beings are instruments tuned by season and story and one another. Strike them with heat and want. Set a rumor beneath the skin. Give the fear a saint's name and a picture of how to move. Then stand back and listen. History remembers crowds, but the summer was lived one body at a time. After the first week, Frau Trophea's husband stopped trying to pull her arms still and learned to walk beside her with a cup of water and a wet cloth. At night, he stood in the doorway while she paced the room, nightgown dark with sweat, feet clicking against the boards in a measure that belonged to no music he knew. Later, when the worst had passed, he would wake at odd hours and listen for a rhythm that was no longer there. A shoemaker from the Tanner's Lane stitched red slippers until his fingers cramped. The council had ordered pears with little crosses for the soles, a sign and a promise that St. Vitus would take pity. He shaped the leather, whispered a prayer he had not used since childhood, and handed the shoes to men with carts. The shoes returned scuffed and dark. Some came back folded around cold feet that no prayer could warm. He kept such pears in a box under his bench until the smell made him carry the box to the river. A novice from a nearby monastery learned the road to the shrine by heart. He walked with the afflicted, keeping pace without touching them, singing a soft psalm that matched a steady breath. At the chapel, he watched a priest press a relic to calloused heels and saw, more than once, the way a face collapsed into sleep, as if a knot had loosened inside the chest. He also watched others sway through the rite, as if the words could not find them. When he took his vows the next spring, he kept the memory of both kinds of mercy. A clerk found work for his hands in copying notices. He wrote the ban on music, then the fine for drummers, then the license for a small procession to the shrine, then the warning that no processions would be allowed without leave. His letters stayed neat even when the streets did not. Years later, he would show his grandson the page and trace the lines that tried to hold a city still. There were quieter stories that never reached the ledgers. A girl who learned to walk again without counting in her head. A baker who could not stand the beat of kneading and paid a neighbor to work the dough before dawn. A mother who tapped her own calves at night when the wind took the shutters and only stopped when her daughter spoke her name. These are not miracles or scandals. They are the ways people resume a life after a rhythm has passed through it. When autumn arrived and the first cold slid down from the hills, the city finally breathed without listening for a footfall. The shrine burned fewer candles. The market found its noise again. Even so, a few people stepped wide around the places where the worst of it had happened. Habit is a kind of map. Fear is a kind of landmark. Strasbourg learned both that summer and kept them longer than anyone planned. Years pass, and the city learns to fold the summer of dancing into the shape of ordinary memory. Ordinances survive longer than fear. No public music without license. Processions only on named days. Shrines to be visited with family and a priest. To newcomers, these are rules among many. To those who lived through the heat, they are stitches holding a rent place together. Religious life changes in ways that matter. Reformers arrive with sober hymns and sharp questions about relics and pilgrimages. Processions grow fewer. The shrine that once overflowed with ex-votos grows quieter, candles pooling light only on feast days. Some say this is why the streets stay still. Others say the difference is bread and weather, not theology. Either way, the city learns that ritual can direct fear or dissolve it, that a path to a chapel can bind a panic, and that closing the path can sometimes bind it in another way. Printers keep the tale moving. A woodcut of stiff-faced dancers sells well in markets far from the Rhine. The picture teaches strangers what to imagine when they hear the word frenzy. It fixes the memory as a ring of bodies in front of a church, a priest with a relic, a drummer on the edge of the frame. The true sound was often only feet and breath. But the picture outlives sound. Children who were not born in 1518 can describe the scene as if they had watched it from a windowsill. Inside the city, the story thins into anecdotes that surface at harvest feasts and winter ovens. A cobbler tells how he stitched red slippers until his fingers ached. A widow remembers a husband who came home at last with legs quiet but a heart that never fully settled. A clerk shows a page with neat letters that tried to hold chaos, and old men shake their heads at the thought that ink can bind a summer. Explanations harden into habits of speech, grain when the weather turns and the rye grows horns. Hot blood when the sun sits on the roofs like a lid. St. Vitus when children mock or adults forget vows. Collective fear when the listener is learned and the room is safe. None of these erases the others, because what happened needed more than one cause. A city is a web. Pull any thread, and the whole trembles. By the time new generations walk the market, there is no trace to see unless you know where to look. A widened square where a platform once stood. A chapel with scuffed flagstones that match the span of a circle. A rule about music that no one remembers writing. Strasbourg keeps these like faint scars under the skin. On hot days when the bells ring close together, some people still feel their calves tighten before they laugh and scold themselves. Memory is a muscle. Once trained, it never quite forgets. What remains of that summer is not only a ledger of days and names, but a lesson about how people move together. A city is an instrument. Heat tightens the strings, hunger warps the wood, sermons and rumors tune the ear, and then a single note can set the whole body vibrating. One woman starts, others follow, and soon the square answers like a drum. Authorities try levers they understand. Build a platform, then tear it down. Hire musicians, then find them. Bless shoes, ban songs, march relics through the streets. Each measure helps someone, harms someone, or arrives too late for both. Historians will keep offering causes, and they are right to do so. Bad grain can set nerves on fire. Fear can travel by sight and sound. Ritual can bind panic into a shape that can be walked. Strasbourg in 1518 is what happens when all three lean on a place at once. The record is thin, but you can still hear the texture if you read slowly. Sweat on stone. Bells too close together. A husband walking beside a wife with a cup of water because pulling her arm does nothing. The city did not solve the dance so much as outlast it. Rain came. Grain improved. Rules settled into ruts that made sense to people who remembered why they were written. Life returned with its ordinary quarrels. Even so, habits formed in fear endured. Musicians kept licenses in order. Priests watched for the moment a hymn became a sway. Mothers listened for the tap of a heel that did not match the loom. Tell the story forward, and it sounds like an enchantment that lifted. Tell it backward, and it looks like an inevitability that gathered. Both are true in the way that human things are. We prefer sharp answers. The past hands us braids. If there is a warning here, it is simple. Bodies learn from other bodies. Minds learn from crowds. A rhythm can be born from weather and want, and a name we give to our fear. Once taught, it can return. Imagine the square at dawn, weeks after the last procession to the shrine. Stones still damp from a night shower, a broom scratching in the shadow of a doorway, a baker testing heat with his palm. No drums, no sham, no thud of 100 souls. Only a quiet city getting on with its work. And yet, if you stand there long enough, with the sun just climbing the roofs, you can almost feel a tremor underfoot that is not there. A ghost of a cadence crossing the stones, the memory of a summer when Strasbourg learned how easily a heartbeat can become a song.